thanks for continuing with us this morning. This is a real treat for a number of reasons. So if you follow baseball, you know baseball terms, leadoff hitter last night, Division I coach, known across the nation. Batting second, James Bond, and how can you beat that? Batting third, a four-star general, and now, batting cleanup, number 4 here, which is the perfect place in the lineup for you, is Karyl with Transmute, and you're going to love this story. Again, all of her biography, you can look at all of it on LinkedIn, but we're going to pull out part of your journey. But first and foremost, give the elevator pitch that Craig and Kelly are so famous for making sure that every founder knows, so that everybody gets a feel for Transmute, and then we're going to get into your story.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph. So my name is Karyl Fowler, as they mentioned. I'm CEO and co-founder of Transmute. What we're tackling is solving the multi-billion-dollar paper problem in global trade. So we're using some emerging identity and credentialing technology. We've been working with U.S. Customs and Border Protection for the last 4 years now on first applying the technology to steel and automotive imports and slowly spreading out to other areas of national interest.
Yeah, and by the way, for those of you that are in the back, we can actually hear you. So if you're getting, hey Rob, can you ask them talking to go out in the hallway so we can have this conversation? Because you're going to want to hear this. So, supply chain. Everybody's kind of heard about that recently. Why is your technology so unique to that paper problem you're talking about? And you're starting with steel and automotive, but where does it go from here?
Awesome. So it's probably helpful to set some context, because at least for me, when we started working with U.S. Customs, I had to ask no less than 4 times in the first meeting, are you sure that we don't know how much steel is coming in from China? Are you sure that there is no digital data set that exists that allows us to query this, even if it's not in real time? And the answer was no. In fact, many of the commodities that we rely on, not only in America but across the Western world, really are tracked and traced still on paper. Where they may make it into a digital format still includes multiple humans along the way, on the order of up to 50 copies of paper that moves a good to a port of entry. And in fact, U.S. Customs, when it comes to steel and many other commodities, takes on average about 32 days to actually track down any of this data or paper documents in order to do any sort of investigation. And so this means that a lot of counterfeit goods, dumped goods, and other kinds of nefarious activities end up having materials in our infrastructure. So digitization is one thing, and of course the commercial industry, especially after COVID, anyone in logistics is focused on digitalization because we want more resilient, healthy supply chains. But when it comes to the kinds of digitization that U.S. Customs and Transmute is working on, we've kind of taken a unique flavor. So in particular, we're actually digitizing all of the documents, everything from certificates of origin, mill test reports, which is one of the most critical in steel and automotive, and all the way through the chain into something called verifiable credentials. Now this is a technical term that really just is a new high-integrity data format, and I've started to convey what this is as like a shipping container for data, because it really can't be understated the similar impacts of this data model. So what verifiable credentials allow you to do is it allows digital data to function a lot more like a driver's license, where the authority and the integrity is intact. We're using cryptography for that. You always know the known origin source who claimed that information. And you can now selectively disclose this information in real time all the way across the supply chain, which means that U.S. Customs can get better data faster from earlier in the supply chain, whereas today they're, again, waiting for that bottleneck, or when they have questions, having to track down that information.
So, again, in the room, as you know, we have investors, future investors, and friends of Moonshots. But probably the hardest thing, as you described the company, for people to still wrap their brain around is how much paper, recording stuff on paper, is still involved in one of the most important parts of global markets, which is the supply chain. And you all are going at that. But it doesn't just start with today. It actually goes back to the beginning of the origin story for Transmute and what you've done. So part of, as Kelly and Craig have said, it's investing in extraordinary people. I think you're extraordinary. They think you're extraordinary. But go back to those beginning days. You were at the Chamber of Commerce, you're here in Austin, you're seeing all these things. You're at McCombs, at the MSTC program, which those of you that don't know, I'll do a foot stomp. The Masters in Science, Technology, Commercialization is one of the coolest programs out there. But kind of lump all that together and give your origin story of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, so when I was working at the Chamber during graduate school, I was working on foreign trade zone work here in the Central Texas region. I'm born, raised in Texas, at Victoria, Texas, about 4 hours north of the Mexican border. So I was very familiar with a lot of, specifically, imports across our ports of entry. I then went on to work in the semiconductor industry and landed a role here at what is no longer Novati Technologies in the original Semitech Consortia fab, with a lot of really the OG engineers who pioneered a lot of the copper backend and the infrastructure that now we majorly import from China and Taiwan. It was an ITAR facility, and so I was able to really get a front row seat to US-China geopolitics. I learned a lot about supply chains, not just when it came to the friction, the paper, the just burden of importing, but also where opacity was necessary by design to make sure that we protected our ability to do trade with sometimes often less than trusted trading actors. So that was really the inspiration behind why we've applied the technology we have first to trade and focus first on some of the industries that are more kind of Gulf of Mexico based.
Yeah. So you discover this problem, you start working on it, but then at some point you're going to need to build a team. You're going to need to raise money. You're going to have to take this idea from a PowerPoint into an actual product. What does that look like? And then leave Moonshots, because I know that you knew Craig and Kelly for quite some time before you were officially part of the family. What does that story look like?
Yeah, so we were really early in terms of the technology. So my co-founder is a cryptographer and he is the global author of the technologies that our industry is premised on. So U.S. Customs has actually mandated some open source standards that we've pioneered the builds of. We were working on that very early.
And I just want to double tap that real quick. What Karyl just said is literally the U.S. standard for the work that you're in. You all help write the standard.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, I'm going to be tested, but I'm going to write the test, and then you come in afterwards and grade me. I wrote the test, and I filled in the answers, and that's Transmute.
Quite literally. We also did write the test that you have to pass to submit data this way.
So every one of you that's an investor, pat yourself on the back. You're like, yeah, that's what you invest in, extraordinary leadership. Go ahead.
So effectively, Ori and I were really early. We actually met the U.S. government in these open standards bodies because we knew that even though we were technical, we felt we had the technical expertise, we were going to need to build some foundations of the industry before we could really access the commercial market. The second piece, as we were growing a team, is, and I'm sure you guys, some of you have read this book, I think Steve Case wrote it on the third wave. It talks about industries that are most ripe for disruption are generally highly regulated. And so that's when we started to focus our attention more on Department of Homeland Security and other kind of standard setters when it came to identifying assets or products and documentation. From there, we actually got our initial contract with Department of Homeland Security through a pretty novel program called the Silicon Valley Innovation Program, which focuses, to the last conversation, on dual-use companies only. And they only focus on solving challenges where dual use is required in order for the government to actually get what it is they're looking for. In this case, there needs to be an incentive, there needs to be commercial problems that are solved in order to compel the commercial trade to send them more data in the format that they wanted. That was 4 years ago. We've since built a team that includes more experts in cryptography, which is one of the cornerstones of the technology, as well as product innovation experts. And we've been operating fully remote. And this year with US Customs, we're actually operationalizing the use of our product for US steel imports and onboarding 7 major producers this month.
And so before we get into where Moonshots comes, yeah, give her a hand. That's freaking badass. So I want to interrupt real quick before we bring in the Moonshots part of the story. But so as we cannot turn on the news without seeing supply chain, globalization, and onshoring, and all these discussions, and the confidence of knowing what's actually coming through. you're literally sitting at the table with people in government that also are trying to fix this problem. And you're like sitting there with them going like, well, we can do this, we can do that. So as you're going forward, you're literally a part of your company and you and your leadership going to have an impact that will be global. It'll be global. So that's probably, and it's safe enough audience to say what Kelly said last night, but you know, it's, as they walk out of the meeting, have that fuck yeah moment. When did that happen? Because it didn't happen the first time you met them. So what does that look like for founders that are in this room, for wannabe founders in the community, and the investors know other founders that they might want to bring deal flow into the Moonshots family? What does that look like, that journey as you got to know them and they got to know you?
Well, so I knew Craig and Lawton for a while before meeting Kelly, and I can say that their networks and them personally impacted the company in a variety of positive ways. A lot of support, help, connections provided long before we ever pitched Moonshots formally. So I definitely, everyone should know you anyway. But that was one angle. The second was it was really important to us to have initial early investors who had been in the founder role themselves. We want to be great at our jobs. It was kind of both myself and my co-founder had been early employees at a variety of startups, but hadn't been in these roles before, and so we wanted coach-player relationships. And that's something I know that Kelly and I talked about before the initial investment. He's been on our board since 2020, and I certainly feel like incredibly grateful. That's exactly how the relationship has played out through some exciting times and decisions and some tougher ones. So that I would highly recommend and refer anyone based on those accounts.
Yeah, but I got to give a shout out though to the Capital Factory team and Josh Pear for not only hosting us here today, but part of the story, because we talked about that in our pre-call. You want to tell a little bit of part of that story?
Yeah, so in fact, I don't think it was Techstars where we met. I think I met Craig when we went through Mobility X. We were part of the Daimler-funded accelerator. We actually got started by winning Capital Factory's first blockchain hackathon. This is how I paid off business school, because business folks don't go to hackathons. And that was, Daimler became our first proof of concept customer and really helped us understand what the enterprise cared about when it came to identifying assets, the human-machine interconnections, some of the privacy concerns when it came to new kinds of data models, and really gave us the core of what our product would be today. We kind of went on to also participate in the accelerator that Oracle sponsored here. They were a major partner early on, right after Techstars, and so we continued to reap the benefits from the Capital Factory network until recently when we formalized that relationship and they invested as well.
Yeah, so we're going to get to your questions here in just a minute because we're going to stay on time. But I just want to share again why I was smiling so much when I sat down, because you know, you go back in the origin stories, how all this is connected. It's like family. It's your character and it's your reputation and how it all connects. So it was me and Craig in 2010, after knowing each other for 20 years before that the idea for my first company with RideScout, he says, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go to this Kelly guy. So we go to Kelly Purdue. He beats us up, you know, wire brushes is pretty good. You probably went through the similar treatment. And then after a while, we get founded, we get funded, and then after that, we get bought by Mercedes. And then Mercedes says, ooh, we love this Austin place. How can we help and do more? So we went to Josh Pear with this idea of Mobility X. And so right around the corner from here was Mobility X. And then you walk in the door at Mobility X, and I was a judge in your early days. And now here I am sitting on stage next to the cleanup batter, the badass that you are. So for me, it's just fabulous. So last thing before we get to your questions, what's your ask? You're in front of this talented group. What do you need to make this company go even farther, faster, and put more rocket fuel in?
So where we're at with U.S. Customs today in the program that I mentioned is it's a 4-phase program. It's not an SBIR grant. It's been true revenue. But after we wrap up this 4th phase this year, we have a fast track to be able to do a sole source contract with any agency under Department of Homeland Security without them going to the public market for any sort of competitive bid. So we're particularly interested in connections to relationships in other Department of Homeland Security agencies or above and beyond the folks that we know today in U.S. Customs and CTPAT. So that is my targeted ask.
If only there were people in here that were connected to government. Past life, future life, current life. Okay, your questions. Questions for Karyl. There's got to be something. I'm going to call on somebody. Okay, there we go. Mark, go ahead.
So I'm a retailer. We import a lot of too is, are these applications that we can bring to bear, sorry Josh, in our business?
Yeah, so the question was, for these who didn't hear, so Mark's business is in retail, and they import a lot from China. And the question basically is, can this technology start to apply to other sectors? Did I capture it? Okay.
Absolutely. So I've talked a lot about steel and automotive. We hold a contract on applying the technology as well as in e-commerce. We've tested for OEM imports. So truly it's a commodity agnostic solution, and we would love to work with companies above and beyond those in the steel space.
There you go. Other questions? Yes, sir, Larry. There's a microphone right there.
So your focus up to now has been U.S. Customs, Homeland Security. Is this, I mean, do you have, this is not just a U.S. issue, do you have interest, or are you having approaches from G7 countries? They've got the same issues on tracking what's coming in, what's going out. Because it would seem that the prize is, although the U.S. prize is huge, there's a whole world out there.
100%. So just briefly, we've actually taken these same technology standards to the UN CFACT. And
do you want to explain that acronym?
Yeah, so I'm going to not be able to explain the
Gist.
CFACT part, but it's effectively a standards group that works on technology standards for various kind of UN initiatives. And in the case of digital trade, the same standards have been certified for use with them. And we have had some activities specifically around EU imports. We've tended to focus, there's 14, although now recently we signed 2 additional mutual recognition agreements with countries where we effectively recognize their security treatment for imports and exports. We've tended to focus our outbound on those countries, so that includes Mexico, many of the G7, of course, there's kind of a long list, but it's absolutely global, and customs organizations around the world tend to let the US set the first standard, and so that's why we focus there first.
Other questions?
Yeah, so is the end goal to get customs to push this out as a standard to the point of origin, so that it's not all dumped on us when things show up to sort it out, whether it's digital or not, that the originator has to comply with all these so that it's essentially near real time?
100%. So in fact, that the proof of origin is part of the title of our contracts with them. So that's absolutely what it is. They've already mandated the technology standards. So today, U.S. Customs, the information they're typing import data into the system is a very archaic IBM-based system called ACE. Nobody in here should ever want to deal with it. And so part of why they mandated the use of open standards is much like the early semiconductor days. They wanted pre-competitive foundations that lots of service providers could create a competitive market to enable trade organizations to submit data that way. And their hope is that from the very front end of the line, that a steel producer, which is actively what we're testing today, can submit origin data directly to U.S. Customs for e-clearance or digital pre-arrival clearances.
Other questions? Okay, while we're waiting for that question, I'm going to ask now, as I'm realizing this, when do you work on like your Dr. Evil look, when you're going to literally be able to see everything around the world that's moving? You have to work on that. It's very cool. Next question.
Hi, I have a question about what are your contracts look like with the government? Are they like year-long, 10 years long? How do you get paid? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so each contract has been about 8 months to a year long. We've more than doubled our contract size when we added the e-commerce work stream. And like I mentioned, the Silicon Valley Innovation Program is not a grant, so these are OTA contracts with Department of Homeland Security, and there's a 4-phase step, and then you're cleared to do sole source or direct contracts thereafter.
That was some seriously cool government contract nerd talk. OTAs, other transaction authorities, were invented during the early days of NASA and the space program because, shocker, federal government doesn't always move fast enough, so these funds are available to be able to speed innovation. So it's fabulous you got part. So we have time for one more question. One more question. Yes, sir.
I'm curious, given a lot of the conversation we've had today about dual-use technologies, whether you've thought about expanding into that space with defense clients and things, because if you think about logistics internally to the military, it seems like there would be a lot of application there.
100%. So that would be another ask. We have talked to some parts of DoD. We've recognized that there's an even higher burden in terms of the audit trail when it comes to proving the legitimacy or the origin of materials, and so it's a tremendous opportunity. It would be applied nearly identically. So the technology is there. We went for the lowest hurdles before expanding.
So I remember, I'm making a prediction here, a year from now, by looking back in the past. So I don't know if y'all remember, but years ago, the data being carried between New York and Chicago, between the two different markets, somebody figured out that if you could tap into that data stream, you could actually see trades before they happened, and they made untold billions before they figured it out, and then they kind of shut that down. Transmute and Karyl one day will be able to see the future of global markets just because, and this is my prediction, of what is happening and where it's happening. So I wouldn't be surprised in a year we go from Transmute, the company, the technology first company, to the hedge fund, because they're going to be able to make big bets on what's going on in the future. So, you know, another portfolio company of Moonshots. That's why you're batting clean up here and knocking it out of the park. So everybody help me thank Karyl for being here this morning.